Hello everyone. Today we are going to present you SQL and NoSQL injection attacks and ways to prevent them. I am Utku Özgür and my group member's name is Abdullah.
Hello.
Now I will present SQL injection attacks. Here is the outline for the SQL injection attacks. First I will explain SQL, talk about its basics. Then I will talk about SQL injection attacks, its goals, recent attacks made, its types, and ways to prevent these attacks. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It's a programming language used to manage databases. SQL commands are issued to and executed by a database to reach out to a data in database or like create a database. So we can do lots of operations on the database with SQL. SQL basics. Databases store the data inside using tables with different sizes, like with different number of columns, different number of rows. SQL statements or queries use different clauses to manage the database to reach out the data required. Different classes of SQL is like select, from, insert, and there are also lots of other classes. Here we can see an example query. Here select, from, and where clauses is used to get contacts from that are living in Seattle. Email addresses of the contacts that are living in Seattle. So what's an SQL injection attack? It's a code injection technique. It takes advantage of user inputs used inside SQL statements. When these inputs are used, we can inject malicious SQL code to the user input to execute a malicious code inside the database. Now I will show you an example of a simple example of SQL injection attack. And this is a website that's intentionally created as a vulnerable database inside it. So for username, I'm just going to type this, which is a quotation mark or and a quotation mark equals and add a quotation mark. I will write the same thing below for password too. We know that this is not a legitimate user, but when we try to log in, we can see that we are logged in as Stefan, and we can also use the query used to authenticate the login attempt. Here we can see that the username and password we typed are put inside the SQL query, and that's why we were able to log in to the system. If we go back to the presentation, so SQL injection attacks can have different goals. This may be modification of data inside the database, leakage of sensitive information inside the database, denial of service to make database unable to respond, or authentication bypassing like I did previously on the website, or gaining full control of the database by impersonating a user or getting admin keys. SQL injection attacks are really important attacks. These attacks are done to not only small companies, but it's also done to bigger companies, and it shows the importance of these attacks. One of the recent ones were done on Ubuntu Linux forums, and information of 2 million users are leaked after this attack. Another attack done recently in May 2016 was on LG smartphones. Hackers had the ability to modify text on LG phones with this attack. Another attack done recently was done on Florida election site on May 2016, and all of the usernames and passwords stored in this website are taken. Types of SQL injection attacks. There are three types of SQL injection attacks. One of them is in-band SQL injection attacks, which is also called first-order attacks. The other one is out-of-band SQL injection attacks, which is also called second-order attacks. And the third one is inferential SQL injection attacks. In in-band SQL injection attacks, same channel is used for the attack and the result gathering. There are two different types of in-band SQL injection attacks. One is based on errors. It takes advantage of error messages sent by the database. Like when we try to log in to a database, it may sometimes, if it's enabled, it can send back an error message. This can give us info about the database and how, for example, login credentials are handled. Union-based attacks takes advantage of SQL's union clause operator to extract data from the different columns of the database. Union operator is used and all information is gathered by this way. In out-of-band SQL injection attacks, different channels are used for attack and result. This attack depends on the targeted database. It depends on that database's way to handle DNS or HTTP requests, or how it informs the admin of the database. An example can be after the attack, database is forced to send an email that includes the target data. This can be made to send by the attacker to the database. Inferential SQL injection attacks doesn't use any data transfer, and database structure is inferred by monitoring database behavior. There are two different types of these attacks. One of them is Boolean based. In this type, inference is done with true or false results depending on the query. So attacker attacks the database by sending different queries, and it tries to infer the behavior of the database by checking the true or false results. Another one is time-based. In this type, inference is done by sending queries that cause delays on the database. In this type of attack, attacker sends a delay for a case and no delay for another case, and when it sees that there is a delay, it infers that the behavior written in the query is executed. There are many different ways to prevent SQL injection attacks. One of them can be escape strings, as you saw in the example. Escape strings, we took advantage of quotation marks with escape strings. These quotation marks are automatically converted to slashes, so this way we cannot put malicious inside the SQL query. Another one can be input validation and limitation. Most of the usernames and passwords are limited to a certain a size. For example, most of the web pages wants us to write a username that's between 8 or 16 characters. This can be used for SQL too. Another one can be syntax check. Syntax check can be done on the user inputs to see if a malicious SQL statement or clause is used. Also, defensive coding is related with syntax check, and with defensive coding and password salting and hashing, both aims to defensive coding aims to write the code defensively so that SQL injection attacks cannot be done. Password salting and hashing can also be done to make it impossible to gather the password of a user. Also, different user privileges should also be used, because if an admin always uses the database with admin privileges and the attacker finds a way to get into the database, this can be a problem. But if admin just gives least privileges to the normal users, even if an attacker gets into the database, he cannot do anything that can harm the database. Now Abdullah will talk about NoSQL injection attacks.
Hello everyone, I'm master student at FIU. Computer engineering is my last term, and I'm gonna talk about SQL injection attacks. My outline is gonna be first NoSQL. I'm gonna tell what is NoSQL after my friend Utku explained what SQL is, and then NoSQL types and examples, and I'm gonna compare SQL with NoSQL and NoSQL security features which may cause like injections attacks, and then finally I'm going to talk about the possible mitigation of attacks that we can have in our systems. So NoSQL is a database, provides a mechanism for storage and retrieval of data which is modeled in a means other than the tabular relations used in relational databases. So it's actually the main difference is storage of data. And NoSQL databases are actually increasing used in big data especially, and real-time web applications. Like as you can see on the right of the slide in the figure, there are lots of NoSQL databases and also being increased. Like there are already more than 100 NoSQL databases that you can have in your system. Most of them are open source. And NoSQL systems are also called not only SQL, which means like they may support SQL query languages as additional to the NoSQL. So what's motivation behind NoSQL, like not only SQL, is simplicity of design and simpler horizontal scaling to clusters of machines, which is a problem for relational databases, and also finer control over availability. And at the figure there are some NoSQL database servers like clients. You can see some big companies such as Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, or Amazon has its own NoSQL database. And NoSQL actually have some types, and like different between each other is like the way they save the data. One of them is key value, which is in like NoSQL database in a key value. All of the data within consists of an index and a value. Like there are a couple of examples, like most popular one is Cassandra. And as a column-based NoSQL database types, DB is designed for storing data tables as sections of columns of data rather than as rows of data. So it is not actually common. It's not the way we know from SQL databases. It's actually opposite way. As an example, we can think about HBase. And the other type is document database. This NoSQL database expands the key value stores where documents contain more complex in that they contain data, and each document is assigned a unique key which is used to retrieve the document. So actually The database is saved into the files with its unique key, and whenever we need it, we're gonna use like some queries to get that file to show in our system. And the most popular one in that category is obviously MongoDB. And as a other type, it's also graph database used in NoSQL. This NoSQL database is designed for data whose relations are well represented as a graph and has elements which are interconnected with an undetermined number of relations between them. As an example, we can think about polygon. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of NoSQL? Like as an advantage, we can think massive scalability, high availability, like that's why it's popular among big data services, and it's lower cost and competitive solution at that scale, and it's predictable elasticity, and it's schema flexibility and sparse and semi-structured data. But on the other hand, as a disadvantage, eventual consistency is not intuitive to program for, makes client applications more complicated. And there is no standardization, like portability might be an issue, and it is actually insufficient in access control. So if you compare SQL versus NoSQL, types of SQL is like one type, SQL database, with minor variations. But NoSQL is lots of types, as I explained before. In development history, SQL database actually is being used quite long, since 1970s. But NoSQL is getting popular recently, since 2000s. And as an example of SQL databases like MySQL, PostgreSQL, we can think, and NoSQL database, the first thing coming to our mind is MongoDB and Cassandra. And schemas in SQL, structure and data types are fixed in advance, but on NoSQL is dynamic actually. Records can add new information on the fly, and it's not similar to SQL database tables. And scaling in the SQL vertically, whereas in the NoSQL is horizontally, and data manipulation in SQL is specific language using select, insert, and update statements, but on NoSQL through object-oriented APIs. So if I come to NoSQL security features, like I take the example of MongoDB in the reference I cited, as most of the systems, also NoSQL systems, do not consider to have security features while they are being designed, they are being built. And as MongoDB in the data at REST API, like you can access the data at REST API and it's unencrypted. As a recommendation, they recommend to protect with OS level mechanisms. And authentication for native connections is available only in unsharded configurations, and we should make them all enable if possible. And authorizations for native connections is read-write admin levels only in unsharded configurations, and we should enable them if possible again. And there is actually no auditing in MongoDB. On the other hand, for authentication, authorization, auditing in RESTful connections, user and permissions are maintained externally, but we should make them configured on a reverse proxy. And database communication is not available in MongoDB. And also as injection attacks is possible via JavaScript or string concatenation. So as the recommendation verify that the application does reasonable input validation. So now I'm gonna talk about possible NoSQL injections. First of all, I'm gonna talk about JSON queries and data formats which is being used at MongoDB. Actually, JSON format is way better than SQL in terms of security. It's more well-defined, very simple to encode, decode, has good native implementation in every programming languages. And breaking the query structure as has been done in SQL injection is harder to do with a JSON structured query. A typical insert statement in MongoDB looks like dbBooks insert, as you can see. This inserts a new document and typical query looks like that. So queries can include regular expressions, conditions, limit which fields get queried and more. But NoSQL injections can be done with PHP array injections. PHP encodes arrays to JSON natively. So for example, array in PHP, as you can see, and is encoded in this way. And let's consider the following situation, like a PHP login screen, which is being used post, HTTP post to send data, and it would look like, as you see, in username equals Tolkien, password equals Hobbit, and the backend PHP code to process it and query MongoDB for the user would look like db login find blah blah. This makes perfect sense and is intuitively what the developer is likely to do, intending a query of db login find blah blah. But PHP has a built-in mechanism for associative arrays which allows an attacker to send the following malicious payload. As you can see, you can give like this parameter, like if you use PHP array, and it's gonna be translated to PHP, like will encode it, as you can see, like array ne equals to 1, and in database you're gonna search username not equal to 1 and password not equal to 1, which is gonna be the same as select from logins where username not equal to 1 and password not equal to 1. So this is gonna return all the login collection. So this is like one type of attack as we consider in NoSQL injections. As an other injection can be done by giving like wrong parameters, like with malicious input to queries. As you can see in username, if we give this Tolkien blah blah until the password, and password is just bracelet, it's gonna be translated as like the last line, and which is gonna mean select from logins where username Tolkien and password, there is no password check. So if we know the username Tolkien is there, like if we get the usernames, then we can log in successfully without knowing the password. So another type of injections is JavaScript injection, as in SQL databases. So NoSQL databases is actually ability to run JavaScript in database engine in order to perform complicated queries or transactions such as MapReduce. So think about, this is our PHP part of function, and we have JavaScript in this function. So the parameter is input parameter, and if we give like this code as an input parameter, it's gonna be copied to the parameter in this function, and it's gonna run the function that user injected into our system, and we get this new function. This injection actually looks very similar to classic SQL injection. The defense against such an attack is disabling usage of JavaScript execution, but if still required, properly escaping user input that finds its way into the code. So as an other NoSQL injection, we can think about like REST API actually do not have any like security mechanism, do not have any authorization, and think about like we're from internet and malicious website. If an employee go to the malicious website and malicious website can send that form to the employee computer, and it can all like see the items of NoSQL database by using REST API, since REST API do not require, most of the time, do not require the password. So NoSQL injection mitigations methods. As a first, we can talk about security scanning to prevent injections. For JSON queries such as in MongoDB and CouchDB, almost all languages have good native encoding, which will actually terminate the injection risk. It's also recommended to run dynamic application security testing and static code analysis on the application in order to find any injection vulnerabilities if coding guidelines were not followed. And for REST API exposure, to mitigate the risk of REST API exposure and CSRF attacks, there is a need to control the requests, limiting their format. These measures include accepting only JSON in the content type. HTML forms are limited to URL encoded content type, and hence an attacker will not be able to use HTML forms for CSRF. And the other alternative is using AJAX requests, and those are blocked by the browser thanks to same origin policy. It's also important to make sure JSONP and CORS are disabled in the server API to make sure that no actions can be made directly from a browser. It's important to note that some databases like MongoDB have many third-party REST APIs which are encouraged by the main project though. Some of these are really lacking in security measures we described here. And another type of mitigation is having access control and prevention of privilege escalation. RBAC authorization allow enforcing the principle of least privilege, thus preventing privilege escalation attacks by legitimate users. So similar to SQL injection attacks, proper privilege isolation allows to minimize the damage in case of data storage exposure via the above described injections. So figure illustrates an example in which data accessible via web application is authorized with a user role, while the sensitive entries require the admin role, which is never granted via web interface. So these are our references, and we're gonna show the tools that we're planning to use. For SQL injections, we're planning to use SQL map. It's already out there, but we need to download it and use it for our purposes, and we are planning to have our own database in our virtual machines instead of hacking some websites. And for NoSQL, there's also NoSQL map written in Python again. So we are planning to use this application. So that's all for now. Thanks for listening.